I kept thinking of it as this progression, but I do think it's a paradigm shift. It's just, right, you have to totally change over to this kind of streaming world, this AI world. So I do think companies that are able to capitalize, and I do think it's a mix of startups and incumbents that are really seeing that, hey, this is actually a completely different paradigm of managing risk, of pricing risk, of underwriting. That's the big transition that we're going to start to see over the next decade. The more data you have and the more you can make sense of that data, that is going to give you a lasting competitive advantage over time. I'm Rob Galbraith, and this is the future of insurance.
For over 80 years, Crawford has been providing claims management and outsourcing solutions globally, helping the world's top insurers put their customers' lives back together. Crawford's depth, expertise, and values help it to restore and enhance lives, businesses, and communities in over 70 countries for carriers, brokers, Lloyds, and other companies. Learn more at crawco.com. This April 26th and 27th in Chicago, join me and leaders from companies like Liberty Mutual, Nationwide, Allstate, American Family, Northwestern Mutual, and more for the AI and Innovative Tech event from Reuters. Hear from top leaders in the industry on how we can ensure all the new tech and tools we're investing in and deploying can have the impact we need to push our organizations and the industry forward. Register today by visiting future-of-insurance.com/AIUSA.
It's great to sit down with you. You gave a lot to me. I said this to you before we started recording, so I'll put you on the spot, make you feel awkward. But you were so helpful to me as I was kind of figuring out my journey with the book and the work that I do. And so it's great to give you some time and hear from you this time. So thank you for making more time for me. But I appreciate having you come.
Yeah, it's great to be on, Bryan, and I've been avoiding you long enough. So I'm glad we have the opportunity to sit down finally together and record this.
Well, so I'm sure there's no one listening who doesn't know who you are, but just in case someone's overhearing someone listening and they don't know who you are, give us a little bit of background on, you've been in the industry for a while. You've done some really cool things, different carriers, but beyond that, fill us in on kind of your journey.
Yeah, happy to. And try not to give the full life story. I know that could be a tough podcast listen, but yeah, I was always fascinated by business at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are going to the grocery store with my mom when I was, probably 2 years old, and going through the different aisles. I love the numbers that they had at each aisle. So I love the number and then what they had kind of listed in each aisle, the signs that they have at supermarkets, and going through and putting stuff in the cart. And then the magic really happened at checkout, right? Where we got to scan all this stuff. And then my mom would just pay with, a few slips of paper and a few metal coins, and we got to take this big loot home with us. So I just thought that was incredible. So, I was always interested in business and finance at a young age. Grew up in Michigan. I actually grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I did not go to the hometown school. I went to the rival Michigan State University in East
That
Lansing.
had to feel weird.
It was a little weird.
Betrayal
I had like a bunch of Go Blue stuff in my room growing up as a kid, and had to try. My dad actually worked at the University of Michigan for many years. So I intentionally didn't apply there because I had this sense from my parents that if you get into the University of Michigan, you'll just still live in your bedroom and we won't have to pay for on-campus housing and all that. I was like, yeah, no, that's not happening. I need a little distance from mom and dad. So I ended up going about an hour away. Loved my time at Michigan State, and was an economics major there. Got a really good break leaving college in the mid 90s. Had an opportunity to catch on at the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C., and spent my first 2.5 years there. And I loved my time there. I learned a ton from the PhD economists there. It was a time when Alan Greenspan was a Fed chair.
Yeah, it's the Greenspan years. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. So I was one of 80 some research assistants, and I actually wrote different memos for different people on different economic statistics. And so one of them I wrote actually went directly to Alan Greenspan, and I would go, he had two different, executive assistants, and he had multiple inboxes, but I'd go in every week and I'd drop off, it said, from Rob Galbraith to Alan Greenspan, and I kept dropping off in his inbox. And one of those times I asked his, the assistant that was there, does he actually read these? He's getting this from me and, so many other economists and research assistants. And she said very earnestly, oh yes, he goes home and he reads them in his bathtub every night. And that gave me just this mental image that to this day, I haven't been able to shake, is Alan Greenspan in the bathtub reading my memo. Yeah. And actually in his memoir, he talked about that he had a bad back. And so he lived at the Watergate. And so he would go to the bathtub to soak his back, and he would read all those memos at night. So from that, really kind of began my insurance journey. I moved to San Antonio for personal reasons, and I was fortunate enough. I spent a little bit of time at Citibank working for a stockbroker down here, but caught on at USAA. I had a lot of friends that had told me, hey, whatever you can do to catch on at USAA, it's a great company.
Sure.
And so that's where I spent the bulk of my career, almost 20 years. I started basically as an analyst, strangely enough, in the human resources department. I knew some programming languages from coding statistical models at the Federal Reserve. That's really what I did for the economists there. And they had, for whatever reason at the time, like a very forward-thinking data warehouse, data marts, kind of an enterprise data warehouse strategy in human resources. But they had a lot of grand plans that kept getting cut because it was a cost center, right? And so from a cost benefit standpoint, we would never get the funding to kind of fully build out the vision that our leaders had at the time. So after a couple of years of working there, which I enjoyed, I really wanted to know, we kept watching the CEO every quarter come on and talk about how the company was doing. And this is, as you know, right around the 2000 era, the dot-com boom and subsequent bust and whatnot. So as you can imagine, right, kind of a lot going on in the world. So I'd kind of hear the CEO talking about the business, and I realized, hey, I'm sitting here in HR, like I don't really understand how our company makes money. And as somebody that's interested in business, like that bothers me. So I had the opportunity to move over to the finance department. I supported the loss reserving actuaries for a couple of years, and then had an opportunity to support the pricing actuaries, and then eventually become a pricing analyst myself. And so that really kind of brought me into insurance. That was the time when I took all my CBCU exams to try to learn the insurance world, and really got a good, I guess, foundation and education in the industry. I got a lucky break in some ways. These setbacks in life sometimes actually open new opportunities. So I was struggling. We just had my son, who's now 17, and trying to take all the actuarial exams and become a credentialed actuary. And I was just really struggling. Like I was good enough that I kind of knew what I was doing as a pricing analyst, but not good enough to pass the exams. I'd study just enough to fail, which was probably the worst outcome. I'm spending hundreds of hours.
70% of people who take the exams are in that boat. It's not easy. Yeah,
it's crazy. It's like the bar exam, just raising it right, just super high. And so always been just impressed by those who were able to do it. But so I had the opportunity actually to move to the underwriting department, where I spent the bulk of my career in 2005. They were standing up an advanced analytics department, which was almost unheard of at that time. Now it's very common, right? When we talk about data scientists, that's essentially what I was. We didn't call it that back then. And what was cool about it was there was a lot of conventional wisdom in underwriting, a lot of guidelines, rules like, USAA is not going to insure a secondary home unless they insure somebody's primary home. And if you think about it, this is kind of the Moneyball era, right? Where these are testable hypotheses. It's like, well, that may make some logical sense. And I can see where, an underwriter that's gone through and seen claims come through and all that would put a guideline like that. But, we have the data, like we can say whether this is a rule that makes sense or not. And so as it turned out, secondary homes had about half the frequency and double the severity of primary homes. So from a loss cost perspective, it was almost identical. And so we recognized that, hey, we actually think, for the most part, we've got the right rates. We've got underwriting programs that can handle it. We shouldn't have this rule. There's 8 states that are collateral business states where you can't have that rule. And we should just kind of make that the rule everywhere. And there were literally, hundreds of different kind of rules like that over the course of years, we were able to dig into, and early adopters of things like neural networks, lifetime value calculations, things like that. So from that, I had the opportunity to become a portfolio manager, kind of managed the homeowner line of business for 2 years, and the auto for one. And what was weird at that time was they had a product manager that did top line growth, and they had a portfolio manager that did bottom line. They later consolidated that all into the product management role, where you had kind of top and bottom line accountability. But at that time, I basically only had to worry about the bottom line. And so did that. And then started my leadership journey in 2010, kind of leading a team of underwriters, looking at individual accounts, speaking to people on the phone that we were going to, non-renew, take other. So USAA has thousands of people in a call center, right, working with military members and the families, and issuing policies or handling claims. But many of the folks had kind of risen up through the ranks, right, from that bottom, and so they knew the systems and they had talked to folks and had that. But I had never talked to it. I distinctly remember, right, I've been here over 10 years at the company, and one day my senior underwriter says, "This guy's cussing me out, right? He wants to talk to my supervisor."
Yeah.
"You're the supervisor. Can you get on the phone with
yeah.
them?" And so I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen?" And what I found in that conversation, and many subsequently, unfortunately, was by the time I got on and said, "This is Rob Galbraith, I'm so-and-so supervisor," that person would instantly change their personality, just be sweet as molasses,
Oh,
right?
wow.
It's like, I know what you've been calling my underwriter. I
Yeah.
know what inappropriate language you've been using, and what a jerk you've been or whatever. But now that I introduce myself as the supervisor, and you see me as somebody that could, right, change this outcome or this thing we're asking you to do or whatnot. So I always felt bad for my underwriters, because I really didn't have some of the experiences that they did in some of those tough conversations. Even if I stood on a decision, right, a lot of the emotion had already been let out by that customer. And so, I had that opportunity to be the second respondent, I guess. Then I had the opportunity to move into the policy role, really setting, underwriting appetite for 6 million property policies. So renter, landlord, and homeowner policies. Did a lot of the catastrophe space, a lot with non-catastrophe things like property inspections and whatnot. And really, that's what led to my insurtech journey. So USA had a CEO, Joe Robles, who had been previously, a major figure in the U.S. Army, had managed the Army's budget, then became a board member of USA, and later became CFO, and then ascended to be the CEO. And he was very passionate about innovation, and really had built that into the culture. Innovate in everything we do was kind of his quote that was touted throughout. And it was very successful. The company really kind of over the course of years, it doesn't happen overnight, was really able to incorporate that. We opened an innovation lab, started kind of a corporate venture capital arm, things like that.
Is that when the patent tree was set up?
Yeah, there was a patent tree that was set up, and so I know you've talked to folks like Luke Harris, for your book, The Future of Insurance Volume 1. And so that comes through in some of the conversation that you had with him.
And I was a member during Joe's tenure. So I saw I was watching things change, which, was pretty cool stuff. I mean, so absolutely on the banking side, like USAA was way far ahead of the rest of the industry. Still, actually, there's still plenty of banks that don't do, like, mobile deposit was one of the things that stood out. Although it was using a desktop scanner, like that's the one reason I still had a scanner, but I was excited to do it.
Yeah, they did it with a scanner. They were the first company to do that. Later, obviously, taking a picture with your mobile phone and things like that. And so actually, that leads to kind of a fundamental insight that I had working there, which was because USA insured military members and the families, they never had an agent relationship. The relationship was always direct with the company. So it used to be snail mail back in the, decades ago. Then they were one of the first ones to actually establish a call center with 800 lines. And then when the internet came on, they were one of the first companies to say, we're actually going to allow you to quote and bind coverage online. We're not going to necessarily tell you online where you can find your local agent. You got to go there, and you still got to go visit them in office, right? Later, when it came mobile, think about deployments post 9/11 in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places where you've got that member that's on one bar in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m., right? That's trying to transact some business. Maybe they've talked to their partner back home and there's some issue going on or whatnot. And so whether it's banking or insurance, right? And so, by thinking about that kind of active duty military member and the challenges that he or she face in their life, and, what types of things can USA do to handle a lot of these demanding use cases, it's like, if we can solve that problem, then guess what? Like, that person that's at the mall that's got bad Wi-Fi, right? That's trying to contact, it's not that different of a use case. And so, obviously USA's profile has grown over time, where most of the people are actually not active duty military, right? They're the children or the grandchildren of somebody that's previously served. So their demands are different, or their life experience, but yet, right, it's similar in some ways. And so just that embrace of technology very early on, right? Rather than, hey, I'm going to digitize by putting my form as a PDF document that you can print out, but really rethinking business processes, reimagining what digital experiences could be. And so we did that on the underwriting side. And so that kind of led me to meet with a lot of startups from Silicon Valley and elsewhere, really the kind of the first foundation of insurtech. And it was, just a really cool to have some of these startup companies come in, talk about what they were able to do with emerging technologies, and have that kind of ideation back and forth in co-development, and in some cases AI models and things like that. And so that really, I felt like I was getting a view into the future of insurance that would be exceedingly helpful. It was the first time in 20 years of the industry where I actually felt like there was something new and different. I mean, I had friends from college that had gone off to Silicon Valley, and I visited them or whatnot, but that felt like just such a different world than the insurance world that I was. And then I could see them kind of converging. And so it took about a year. And I really had two purposes in writing my book, The End of Insurance as We Know It. One is to let insurance professionals such as myself kind of know what was coming, know what I was seeing, and saying, hey, I do think this isn't a fad, right? This is a wave that's coming. We've seen it disrupt other industries. And yes, there are some things that are unique about the insurance industry, but they're not immune from disruption, right? Everyone loves that buzzword. At the same time, so many technologists, investors, entrepreneurs were coming through the doors at USAA and trying to sell me on their solutions. And I'd ask them things like, hey, that's really cool. I'm trying to understand this technology. Well, that helped me reduce my claims frequency.
Yeah.
And I'd get a blank stare back. It's like they didn't speak the language of insurance as this barrier. And so I wanted to kind of create an insurance 101 where you don't have to get your CPC, or you don't have to pass your agent licensing exam in order to have a working knowledge of our industry to be able to help bridge the gap. And a lot of people kept saying, no, Rob, you got to pick one of those two audiences. Either it's the non-insurance professionals or the insurance professionals. You can't write a book for both. And I don't know why. I just fundamentally felt like, no, I can't. Like, these are two audiences, and I value them equally. And I think this is equally important. And thankfully I can, the book came out in February of 2019. And so, just a tremendous response from folks from all walks of life. And particularly both of those camps, I've gotten just tremendous feedback.
Well, I want to speak to that. So the book is like this mainstay for so many people in the industry, coming in the industry, watching the industry. And I remember when I read it, it goes from talking about some complex things going on and how that sort of goes forward, but then it walks you through what they actually are and the insurance underneath that. And so, for some people, it's like, well, I don't need to know what underwriting is. I am an underwriter. I guess you can skip pages. Like and you say that, like, it doesn't have to be a linear read. It can be a reference material that you jump into different parts. But one thing I have learned is people don't always know all of the bits and pieces, and they don't feel like they can ask. And so this is actually something that's come up a number of times for people who are like, honestly, I've had people who are like, this changed my whole approach to the insurance industry. People selling into it or building a solution for it or new to it. And they were like, there were so many things I didn't really get that I never felt I could ask anyone about, because I didn't want, a potential customer to think I didn't understand their business. Or people in the industry, it's like, I didn't want my boss to know that I didn't get how these pieces of the puzzle fit together. And it's like a lot of what we do in insurance ends up really siloed, not for bad reasons, just like you're in your track, you're working on your, small commercial accounts. Like, you don't know what's going on with the really big stuff or the personal line stuff or the claims or whatever. It's natural. So this was that chance for a lot of people to safely learn about the things that they didn't know. And so I do have people that are like, no, it's just like a reference material for me now at this point, after reading it cover to cover, that I still go back to for things that have come up that I need to get my 101, but also have the depth and the complexity about what's going on in the space. It does speak to two audiences, and marketeers will tell you that's the wrong answer. You got to pick a lane and go for that. But it also works, because sometimes we exist in one audience or the other. We're not all linearly in one, only one of those all the time.
Yeah. And obviously this is a conversation that was trying to happen, that is happening, that continues to happen. Right. And so, my intention was really to bridge that divide. And I think, certainly not the only one to do that, but I think it definitely, to your point, went a long way. One of the things that really struck me, Bryan, so I shared most of my experience at USAA. It's a, personal lines company, sells business direct, and really primarily is focused in the US. They sell a small amount of business internationally to active duty troops overseas. But, really focused on the US market primarily. And so that's really, most of the examples in the book really come from that viewpoint, because that's what I know. And I actually made a conscious kind of decision in writing of, yes, I know there's a lot of amazing things going on in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America and elsewhere. That's exciting innovation. That's really new stuff. But I don't know those worlds. I don't know those regulatory environments. I've never worked there or whatever. I don't know commercial that much. I don't know a lot in terms of life and health, right? So I kind of stuck to my lane, I guess, in terms of what I know. The reception that I've gotten internationally, and from folks that are outside of PNC, right, that are in the life and health space, it's just tremendous. And people have said, "Oh, I've seen connections with what I've done here," or whatever. And really, I think you feel this way with the books that you've written. It's like, my intention is to spark that kind of ideation. It's not to have all the answers, right? But it's to kind of start conversations, to start thinking, to inspire people to innovate in whatever space they are, wherever they may be located. And so that was an aspect that I don't know was necessarily conscious at the time of writing, but certainly has come out. And I've been able to travel, all over the world pre-pandemic to give talks and to meet audiences since the book's come out in a way that I just would have never, ever, in a million years expected when I was writing the book.
And it's been translated into, I know Farsi is one of them.
Farsi. There was some efforts to translate it to Mongolian and Spanish, and hopefully this may come to fruition. And cool. I've got asked them, is there French edition yet or not, things like that. I've had people write, reviews, book reviews in German and others. So it's pretty cool. Amazing. Yeah, in fact, I actually won the best translated book in Iran. There are two gentlemen that spent 6 months to translate it into Farsi, and then they won an award. So they sent me some pictures from the award ceremony. So that's amazing.
Great. And that's a tricky thing, because you can't directly do anything in Iran. So it takes giving of yourself for them to do the translation and allow them to run with it.
But I was basically like, hey, I can send them a copy of the book, and there's no obviously money or commercial relationship that can take place because of the relationship between the US and Iran. But just to be able to kind of bridge, that cultural and political divide of insurance professionals, right, that they have a need. I mean, it's a huge country, and they're as impacted by a lot of these changes in the sector over there as they are here in the States where I'm based, or again, other parts of the world.
Yeah. And to your point, it was about the impact, the conversations it sparks, the growth that it sparks, the understanding. So that has nothing to do with who's selling what, where, when. But it has continued 3 years on plus at this point. It's continued to do really well. It's still, honestly, like, people still bring it up regularly. That's saying something. So if people have been on the fence, or maybe they picked it up and haven't opened it yet, you should. And a lot of what you say is timeless. A lot of the things, one of the upsides of the industry maybe moving slow at times is it's not like everything in the book, well, that's all past now because it was 3 years ago or whatever. You talk about APIs, you talk about mobile, like lots of different things that are still very much 100% active, front and center things that we dig into every day in the industry. What are some of the things that you see have changed since then, or maybe predictions or sort of outlook that you made, and either things didn't play out that way, or maybe it's a timing or a facilitating technologies kind of question? What, as you look back, what's your kind of take on the way things have gone?
So much there, right? And this as an author, Bryan, it's like as soon as you put it in paper and it goes out, right, then the half-life kind of begins. And somebody actually asked me, I had people as I was going through the writing process, like, why write a book? Why not just have a blog or publish in a forum where you can't have this running? And I still felt like there's something unique about sitting down with a book and flipping through it. Yes, it's old school, and I will say that it's paperback and Kindle, but 2/3 to 3/4 are people still want the dead trees version, as they call it, right? Because they can mark it up and they can dog ear and they can kind of, put stickies in it and all that. And I've seen, folks have sent me photos of that. And I love seeing that when somebody's got a really dog eared copy or whatnot. So I definitely thought there was value, right, in kind of still putting it in a book format. I had a founder tell me last year, everything you predicted in the book has come through. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but thank you for thinking that. A few things that I think have really stood out. Number one, I mean, just the pace of change. I talked to companies today about what I call the scaled emerging technologies, and scaled is an acronym that stands for sensors, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, localized knowledge, things like aerial imagery, GPS, et cetera, efficiencies of the back office, RPA, OCR, NLP type technology, and then digital distribution and communication. We've seen a rise, particularly in the small commercial space, of so many different marketplaces and small
total
commercial
battleground
going the way
today.
of personal lines. Exactly right. Yeah. So, I wish I had that framework in the book, right? Because I know that that's a very accessible framework that a lot of people have kind of latched onto. And I've had a lot of wonderful, conversations in the talks that I give and trainings that I do for corporate clients, kind of around those concepts and how, right, their companies are responding to that. I talk a little bit about this in the book, but kind of subsequently I've written articles on it and had conversations about, hey, guess what? The independent insurance agent isn't dead yet, right? They haven't gone the way of travel agents. And we see companies like, Hippo, Neptune, many others, where they may have started saying, hey, this is just a middleman, right? We're going to cut out some costs. We're going to go direct to consumer, to kind of realize, hey, actually, like, what they do from a customer acquisition cost is pretty efficient compared to trying to be out there on their own. And hey, there's all this, servicing aspects of the policy and other things that agents handle that I've got to handle on my own if I don't have that aspect. So I just find that really fascinating that a lot of these companies, they may sell direct and through agents, but 90 to 95% of the sales are actually through the agency channel rather than the direct channel. I don't think that's something that I would have, I didn't predict the demise of agents or anything like that, as many people have done for now, 2 decades, but I don't think I saw just the staying power. And now we're seeing a lot of technology innovation around the agent broker channel, which is really exciting. And that wasn't really explicit, at the time the book came out. One other interesting thing I think is just this idea of companies starting as technology companies and then making the pivot to be either an MGA or MGU, where quite frankly, like, the sales cycle into the industry has been really challenging and difficult and long. People talk about, being left at the altar right after dating for so many years, right, and trying to make that relationship happen. And so there's obviously companies like Lemonade, like Hippo, I think, have kind of, Kin. I mean, another one, some of the successful exits that companies have had, or growth, right? A lot of investors were kind of saying, hey, what are you doing to be an MGA? There was kind of a whole round of founders since the book came out that said, my VC backers and my board, they want to know what it takes to become an MGA, right? Can you help me with that and whatnot? I was positioning myself initially only as a technology play. And there's this whole aspect almost of like, eat your own dog food. Hey, if you have some special insider data and you think you can reduce losses, right? Well, they're trying to convince some carrier to take a risk on you. Like, why not just get backing from a reinsurer or somebody and, almost prove it yourself that way. The other thing too, that I think is kind of interesting is the paradigm of the reactive nature to the more of the proactive nature. Embedded insurance is a feature among a broader offering, right? Where you're tying some type of risk prevention to the industry. And I think a fascinating trend is that, over time, I think you're going to start actually seeing individual kind of non-catastrophe risks get lower and lower through, right, as we see more and more kind of successful risk prevention. But yet catastrophic risk, I think, is going to grow, where you see it not just with natural catastrophes and climate change, but you're going to see it with, cyber risks, obviously the pandemic, things like that.
Liability matters, nuclear verdicts. And I mean, there's lots of things that are driving severity up, even if frequency is being controlled differently on the smaller things. Rob, I don't want to take all of your thunder going forward, But in addition to your sense of changing dynamics on claims, what do you think we're in store for? And I don't know if that's a 5-year question or 10 years out, or, if you've got some framing where like there's these things brewing now, the things you talked about in the book, the embedded stuff, the new technologies that agents are taking hold of, and kind of the rethinking of distribution, not as a burn the agents and everything's going to be done digitally, but how do we enable a different way of looking at the channel? Where do you see this heading? Like what's your outlook for the industry, or what do you think do you think there'll be a change in something major in the market in some reasonable time frame that we're all going to be alive for? I'm talking 80 years from now when flying cars and robots will do everything.
I do. One of the things that I think has been really interesting is, originally I kept thinking that there's going to be an evolution, right? But yet I still see that in 2022, we're asking people what their age, gender, or marital status are to rate auto insurance, which is really ridiculous. I mentioned the scaled framework. Well, that's part of the idea, is that you have sensors that can kind of directly observe behavior now, right? And whether that's wearable, whether that's smart home, you see it a lot in agricultural crop insurance and things like that. It's like, now that we have these cheap sensors through nanotechnology that can just directly observe behavior in real time or near real time, all that data can be streamed over cellular networks or Wi-Fi, can be stored in cloud and processed in cloud computing, and then you can use AI and advanced algorithms to kind of find patterns and make sense of the data. Why are you asking people how old their home is, right? What the age of their roof is and things like that. And
things they don't know.
Things they don't know, that they're right, that nobody knows the square footage.
Right.
Like, they don't know if you should or should not include your basement, right? If it's finished or not, things like that. And so originally I kept thinking, well, companies are going to adapt, right? But increasingly I realized that so many people are tied to workflow. So many people are tied to the status quo. So many people, quite frankly, I talk about offensive innovation and defensive innovation. Some people talk about it being, disruptive innovation versus incremental, or, process versus strategic, things like that. People have kind of used different terms for the same concept of, I call it the gate agent problem. So, right, if you've ever been to the airport, you try to get your flight change or an upgrade or whatnot, and you see this green screen system that agent is using, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe you're still using this technology. Yet if you were to make an intuitive, right, interface that would make you and I a semi-competent gate agent, Bryan, like, for that person, that's actually going to slow them down, because they know the system. They know all the function keys. They know the tabs, right? They know the system. They've been working in it for decades. And so you're actually slowing down that expert by introducing kind of a new system. Yet when that person retires, right, or if you're trying to hire a new gate agent, like training them on that new system, it just becomes ever more costly. And so I kept thinking of it as this progression, but I do think in some aspects it's a paradigm shift. It's just, right, you have to totally change over to this kind of streaming world, this AI world, like, that doesn't comport with your GLM models and your core applications and things like that. And so that's really, I think, the big leap. Newer companies, right, can kind of jump right to that. I do feel like they're starting at a lower, in some ways it's lowering what I call the cost floors. I talk about the expense ratio and how it's really remained flat over the last 10 years in my book, meaning as premiums have gone up, expenses have gone up by the exact same amount. We're not getting more efficient as an insurance industry. And so those higher expense ratios provide opportunity for startups to come in and to kind of undercut us. And even some incumbents have recognized this. And I give some case examples in talks that I give. But, we talk about the innovator's dilemma quite a bit. And so some of those embedded products or travel insurance or pet insurance, whatever it is, right, like that could easily become health insurance, a year from now or 2 years from now, or things like that. So I do think companies that are able to capitalize, and I do think it's a mix of startups and incumbents that are really seeing that, hey, this is actually a completely different paradigm of managing risk, of pricing risk, of underwriting. And then there's this experience part, customer journey through claims or servicing or whatnot, or adding services and features where insurance is just a component of a broader product offering.
Right.
We're in the very, very early innings of that with pay by mile and things like that. But I think that's the big transition that we're going to start to see over the next decade. And if the more that people are able to get kind of sensor data and gain intelligence and patterns, like that can be a moat, right? And I know I've talked to folks about, like, is it owning the data? Is it owning the AI? Is it both? Like, what gives you a competitive advantage? But, all things being equal, the more data you have and the more you can make sense of that data, that is going to give you a lasting competitive advantage over time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's an interesting one because you talk about the reasons why some have trouble embracing that and making those shifts, and I get it. Like, it makes sense. The constraints in the industry are real things, but at the same time, that doesn't take away from the value of those changes, and in some cases, the inevitability of them. So, if you're not changing because of those constraints, but the market is, you're going to be in a difficult position. But even if we don't look at it as like existential crisis, survival issue, it's exciting actually, and it creates opportunities and to navigate it right. So that, I think those of us in personal lines in the early 2000s, when like web-based solutions started to come into place, our CSRs and our underwriters, they would fly through those green screens from like the 1960s. They knew all of the codes. So they were like, the screen couldn't keep up with their typing. So, travel agents, gate agents, watch their fingers. They fly. As soon as you introduce a mouse, you just put the brakes on productivity. So yeah, it looks nicer, but that may not have been the right answer for it. Now we're putting RPA in to try to make up for that. But like, how you navigate these moments where everything, like, we had to go online, there was no way around that, but how do we choose to navigate it? Was that the best answer? I think if you're engaging in the change, you come up with better answers than, now it's too late, we don't have a choice, so we have to do this. Then yeah, you make some decisions that are out of necessity instead of not, being by design.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Bryan, I think one of the things that's been fascinating about the pandemic, right? With the book coming out pre-pandemic, a lot of companies that have been successful in pivoting and modifying workflows or in kind of seizing upon the opportunity were companies that had already innovated or were already tinkering and they obviously weren't planning to, hey, when the pandemic hits, right, we're going to be ready to go. But they were able to quickly adapt things that they were working on and kind of leverage those kind of investments to be able to respond much more quickly than companies that were caught completely flat-footed, that weren't thinking this way, that weren't making these types of investments and really experimenting, right? Yeah. And so I think that's starting, right, we're still kind of early, but certainly the stories that I hear, I can kind of point to differences between, companies that I've talked to about ones that have really been able to seize on this as an opportunity rather than ones that are kind of still struggling to cope. And so, throw whatever, exogenous, right, crisis in there. Yeah. I think that's going to be very true. And again, right, the only constant is change, expect the unexpected. That's a lot of what I talk to companies about is, that is the only thing that you can plan for. And so you've got to build in agility, you've got to build in flexibility as a core competency. And that's just a very different model than our kind of, on-prem, right, mainframe systems that don't talk to one another, don't build this platform ecosystem, mindset that we've had for such a long time in insurance. Yeah.
Rob, this is great. And there's a lot going on. So it's a conversation that continues to need engagement. And I appreciate you coming on. What should people do to get more of this? And I will say, I know one of your answers is going to be LinkedIn, because you're on, like, I have this list. It's not really written out anywhere, but people are like, who should I follow to learn more about what's going on? You're like you, and luckily I've had the people on this list on the show. You're the last person I needed to have on, but you're one of those people. And so I'll steal your thunder on that. People should absolutely follow you on LinkedIn, because you do engage and, put out content that's absolutely part of what's going on in this industry. So that's one, but where else can people go and kind of learn from you, take from you, engage with you on what's going on here?
Yeah, I love hearing from folks, and I love having conversations with folks online. So LinkedIn is probably the best platform to do that. I'm also on Twitter at Rob Galb, ROBGALB. But innovinsurance.com is a great way to kind of just learn more about the book, and trying to go through that process of revamping the site and really kind of catch up on a lot of the themes that we've been talking about. And that's my hope this year, is actually to have more content kind of coming out. A lot of these are conversations that I've been having either with companies or talks that I'm giving at events. A lot of them have been virtual. Thankfully, a few of them are going to be in person this year. So hopefully, if you're out and about, would love to connect with you if you are one of those. But also want to be able to share that through social channels and through the website, just so that everyone's getting the benefit of some of those thoughts. And I know I learn as much from hearing back from leaders. I'm also the co-host of a podcast called the InsurTech Geek Podcast. So those that listen and tune in for that and others. And so it stimulates my thinking. And I very much think of it as, I don't have all the answers, but here's where I'm thinking. And when I hear back from folks either saying, I totally agree or I completely disagree, right? It's through those conversations that I know my thinking kind of evolves over time. And I feel like I just, you can't master everything, right? And I kind of learn that much more. And I'm sure you're the same.
Oh, that's excellent. Rob, thank you so much for sharing some of your time today.
That's great to be with you, Bryan. So glad that you finally tracked me down and we were able to have this conversation.
Good stuff. Thanks, Rob. Thank you to Rob for coming on the show. It's great to get to sit down with him and hear from him and his thoughts and ideas, and of course, his career journey. He's worked in so many different pieces of the insurance industry. He's gotten a really rich perspective. And so when he talks about the change that's coming and how we enable it and where the different technologies and new ideas might fit in, he's coming from a really broad set of experiences in the industry. And we didn't even get into what he did after USAA, but he's worked in more lines, more spaces, and he's just been all over the industry. So you've probably already run into Rob and his thoughts and maybe heard him speak, but it's great to get some time to sit down with him. And if you haven't picked up his book, or if you haven't and haven't read it yet, you should. It's so invaluable for people inside of the industry, outside of the industry, whether you're looking at coming into it for a job, or you're maybe building a solution that might help the insurance industry or compete against it or sell into it, or you're a venture capitalist looking to invest in any of this stuff. Really, so many different kinds of people can take value in it. And like we talked about, you can skip around, you can dig into the parts that are most relevant for you. And if it seems like he's going to 101 to introduce a concept you already understand, that's great. Skip that and move into the part where he talks about why that matters and where it's going. But he does this great job of really making sure wherever you're coming from, you've got your bases covered. He can walk you through those issues, those ideas, start to finish, and you can jump into that wherever in the journey you happen to be. So I love the way that he's put that together. Thank you, Rob. You can grab the End of Insurance at endofinsurance.com and check the show notes. There'll be more links and information about Rob and where you can follow him and get more info, including a direct link to his LinkedIn, which both he and I mentioned. So thank you to Rob for all of that. Thank you to Crawford for sponsoring the episode. And thank you to all of you for listening, watching, however you're taking this in. I have a favor to ask, and that's to spread the word. The work that I do here, the work that Rob does, it's all based on how people engage with us. Spread that word around, share what we're doing with their friends, with their colleagues, with people that are interested in what's happening in the industry. So I ask you to do the same with this show. It's really easy to do. Whatever platform you're listening to this on or watching this, if it's YouTube, like it, subscribe if you can, and then leave a review. That would be huge. And maybe, share it with someone that one person. That's all it takes. Someone who you think, this could be really interesting. They might get something out of this and help their career, help their progress through this industry, or their solutions that they're trying to build in it. Just like Rob's book, all this stuff that I put out, that's what it's there for. So I hope it's serving that purpose. And I ask you to help spread the word to make that happen. So with that, I'll say goodbye and thank you again for tuning in. And I will be back with another great show next time. Thanks so much, everyone.